There we go.
We are here to talk to you about Women Changing Cities, our latest book, which is all around, as it says, global stories about urban transformation, focused on a number of key cities around the world that have been doing a lot of amazing things, which we'll get into. And really, we're quite proud to be, you all are the first time we're presenting this material together, so we're proud to be able to share it with you. The book came out a week ago today, so it's really, really new. Yay! But our hope is that with what we have to share, it provides some inspiration, shows you the wonderful things that we've been able to see ourselves, and hopefully spark some conversation. So we know you've had an introduction to who we are, but just a bit of a reminder. For those that don't know, we are former Vancouverites by way of Ontario who are now based in Delft in the Netherlands. We work in international sustainable mobility, starting out very much on the advocacy side right here in Vancouver, and now taking that knowledge abroad and helping to inspire other people to think about how we can create sustainable, equitable, and inclusive mobility. And we're storytellers, so we've written not just one, keep clicking, 2, but now 3 books, all focused on this idea of, basically how mobility can be stronger, and how we can help more people move around their cities simply by rethinking and reshaping the narrative.
But we're here today to talk about women changing cities, and I can already hear you asking, why write a book about only women? It's something that we were asked repeatedly in this process, and continue to be asked. Haven't we already solved this issue of gender parity? And we're here to tell you that, unfortunately, we have not. Despite the fact that women make up nearly half the population, we are a long way from them being represented fairly in positions of decision-making and leadership. There's some pretty stunning figures on the screen there. One that we didn't include is of the 300 biggest cities in the world currently, only 25 have female mayors. So we definitely have work to do, but I think in the bigger picture, we're here to tell you it's not as simple as men versus women. We're here to tell you that this is potential that our cities can fulfill if we bring new leadership qualities to the table to break through the status quo.
So to explain how we got to Women Changing Cities, I want you to come back with us to the time when everything changed. COVID-19. We've heard about it several times already today. We all viscerally remember that experience. For those of us working in mobility, what we were seeing is sort of this crisis, this global crisis, as a potential turning point in a not-so-quiet revolution in terms of how people can move and changing our idea of how our streets can be used. For us, it sort of started locally, or not locally, but rather in our bubble. And I believe you were going to take this one on, so I'm going to pass it over to you.
Well, and I think it was, despite all the tragedy, despite the uncertainty, there were these rays of hope in this very dark time. And we were seeing cities around the world taking these plans off the shelf for better streets and better public spaces and suddenly implementing 20-year plans in weeks. And the first example that we saw the first summer of the pandemic was Montreal pedestrianizing its streets, arterial shopping streets at a really rapid rate, and creating these outdoor dining districts, but also places for people to gather in a socially distant manner, of course, with the support of the business community, and create a new public realm that has continued in the years since.
And of course, you've all heard about Paris. You would have to be living under a rock to have not heard what they've been up to. But there you saw the sweet street revolution that was happening, or as Anne Hidalgo likes to call it, in terms of the rapid expansion of streets around school streets, not just transforming them into temporary structures, but adding greenery, adding these public amenities to ensure that not only could kids arrive to and from school safely, but also the community would have these wonderful places to gather on the weekends or on school holidays, and really changing Parisians' idea of how their streets could be used.
Just a bit down the street in Brussels, a similar, perhaps lesser-known revolution was happening under their Minister for Mobility. a plan called the Good Move that recirculated traffic out of the city center, created a number of low-traffic neighborhoods around the city, a blanket 30-kilometer-an-hour speed limit, and the establishment of one of the biggest pedestrian zones on the European continent.
And of course, in Barcelona, the Superblocks program rolled out rapidly, creating these temporary redistribution of space at essentially these gathering points or potential gathering points in many of their neighborhoods, using light, quick, cheap materials, creating these new community spaces where you have intergenerational gathering, discussions, play, you have businesses being supported. It's not removing cars completely, it's still having some mobility for people driving as well, but seeing that shift from more automotive parking and moving through space to more staying in the space.
And in the city of Sydney, Australia, we saw a breakthrough, really. A city that had previously installed only 15 kilometers of cycling infrastructure in the previous 10 years, installed over 100 in 2020. Again, in response to pretty dire circumstances, providing alternatives to the public transportation for fear of contagion. People were looking for other means, and the bicycle was able to play a role. And since a lot of this infrastructure has become permanent.
So that was our world. We were seeing, we were from Canada, we did a lot of work in North America, we were living in Europe, and so we're seeing a lot of these usual suspects in terms of the world changing. But at the same time, our work started to shift, and we started to see things a little bit beyond our own Eurocentric or Western borders. So for me, that shift in perspective came with partnership with Women Mobilize Women, which is an initiative that is funded by one of the development agencies in Europe that is specifically focused on elevating the position of women in the transport sector, creating networks, capacity building, opportunities for women, particularly in the Global South. And through that experience, I got to meet the woman you see on the screen up here on your left. Sorry, directions. Her name is Kalpana Viswanath, and she's based in Delhi. I met her for the first time in 2022 after writing an article about how the 15-minute city is the feminist city. It's going to solve all the problems if we do that. And she called me on it and said, that's great in Delft or in Paris or maybe even in Montreal, but in Delhi, not so much. And so through conversations with people like Kalpana and the other women I got to meet as a part of this organization, I started to see that there was a difference. It doesn't mean that can't be solved, but it's really started to challenge that thinking and making me look beyond my own borders.
And for my part, working with the Dutch Cycling Embassy, for those of you who are not familiar with our organization, we are founded and financed by the Netherlands Ministry of Infrastructure, specifically to share knowledge and work with cities around the world to learn from policy and infrastructure in the Netherlands, and have been lucky enough to work with a number of the cities that were featured in the first part of this presentation, including with Mayor Hidalgo's team, with Mayor Valérie Plante in Montreal, bringing them to study visits to the Netherlands, working with them on some of these plans for urban transformation, and I think really helped us both appreciate the kind of leadership that's required to change streets and to bring their cities more up to date in terms of dealing with the challenges of the 21st century.
So that really took us to also, as we're starting to travel more, as we're meeting new people, getting to know some of the lesser known stories of change. These really pivotal things that are happening outside of our proverbial urbanist bubble that are changing the way that people are living in other parts of the world.
So Melissa's already mentioned Kalpana. She's the founder of the Safety Pin organization and based in New Delhi in India. A really kind of game-changing, I think, crowdsourced data collection app, citizen science, if you will, where people can report incidents of social safety, parts of the city where young women and girls specifically maybe don't feel safe. And this data is actually used by the municipality to address some of these hotspots and make the city more safe and inclusive for specifically for women and girls.
At the same time, you see in Bogota a rapid expansion of their cycling infrastructure. Bogota already had a reputation as being the place where BRT took off and where the ciclovia took off as well, first started many decades ago. but taking that initiative, now building it out. How do we build that infrastructure to connect the city so the BRT, which is wonderful but is working at capacity, is complemented by another system that can help the city. And at the same time rolling out one of the earlier examples of bike share that in its first year had thousands of trips, actually in the first few months had thousands of trips, showing that the Bogotanos and the Bogotanas wanted to be able to use a bike to access things like education, healthcare, and work at the same time.
In Manila, it was a similar story to Sydney, definitely historically not a cycling city, but a city that actually closed down its public transportation system completely during the COVID-19 pandemic. And in response to this, through the advocacy of some tremendous young Filipinos, the case was made to try some pop-up cycling infrastructure to provide those essential workers, making those essential trips with all alternative. This was a rapid rollout of eventually 500 kilometers of segregated cycling infrastructure, the vast majority of which has been made permanent. So this is a really unknown but incredible success story in Southeast Asia.
And I know Tirana came up already when we were watching Ian's presentation. I'm like, is he going to talk about all the cities we're going to talk about? Oh, no. But in Tirana, one of us, along with the urban transformation that was happening in terms of how to adapt an informal development into something much more formal, they're looking at how do we design for children. And I think that was when I was listening to the presentations and Mila's speech before this, or the panel before this as well, that reminder of, children play an integral role in our society, and in Tirana, they have a child-first focus, building out playgrounds, but also looking at how to design for school streets, redistributing that road space to ensure that the children that were formerly walking out to a wall of cars after an exciting day of learning were now walking out to this wonderful space where they could keep talking with their friends, meet up with parents, but then just like in Paris, have these community assets on the weekend where people can come and spend time in a place where public space, in the way that we understand it, didn't exist yet.
And then we have, the case of Kampala in Uganda, which was a story that kind of stumbled into our lap through a friend of a friend, a young master's student who came to the Netherlands, to Apeldoorn specifically, to do her master's thesis. And it was looking specifically at how cycling infrastructure and cycling culture could be brought to her hometown of Kampala. And then through sheer determination, through sheer will, through years and years of hard work, again, really accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic, she was able to get this on the agenda to the point where Kampala has now built 2 non-motorized corridors in their city center that's dedicated to walking, cycling, and rolling.
And then lastly, in Latin America, there's a lot that's happening in various cities in terms of addressing public transportation from a more inclusive perspective. But what's really interesting is that there's an entire group of high-level women that have come together to create what they've called the Mujeres en Movimiento, so women on the move, to create a network of those already working in the transport sector, but also creating a foundation for young women coming into it, providing that support, providing that knowledge transfer, providing what is needed for most of us in terms of that retention in transport sectors. We know that whether it's architecture, transportation, urban design, there are lots of women graduating from all of these programs, but the retention of them in these sectors is the challenge. And so in Latin America, they've created this system to hopefully help provide that support to keep women in the field and to keep those voices at the table.
So this is the big reveal.
Yeah. So if you've been paying attention, what do all these stories have in common? Well, women are getting shit done. And so that became the crux of, what is happening and what are all these stories?
But why? Yeah. And I think this is what led to us deciding to spend 2 years of our lives jumping down this rabbit hole, was really to figure out why it is that female leadership is breaking through the status quo. Through these 19 interviews that we conducted, the 11 cities that we were able to spotlight, we came up with 5 leadership qualities that we'll leave you with today to give you a sense of, what we should be looking for, hopefully, in our elected officials if we want to make the change that we know we need to make, but somehow are stuck in the inertia. So the first quality is to lead with empathy, and to us, this sounds, I think, fairly obvious, but in 2025, empathy feels like a revolutionary act. Through cultural conditions, the woman has still historically been the caregiver of the house, which means they're much more likely to be looking at the world through the eyes of a child or an elderly person or a person with a disability. And as a result, they see the city, experience the city in a completely different way, or they can think outside of their own lived experience. And so we think this is, again, not purely a feminine trait, but something that the caregiver of the house can bring to the table when it comes to making these types of decisions. So we have... Look at that, the video worked. This great example of the Bici bus in Barcelona, which is really just a soft form of protest, where the parents have volunteered to organize this regular weekly parade to school in the morning. Over 100 kids that we cycled with that morning to demonstrate to the city the latent demand, the invisible demand for safe, active routes to school. The infrastructure in Barcelona is very much a work in progress, but if they can take to the streets together in a joyful way, in a meaningful way, hopefully they can urge the city to make the changes to the streets that are ultimately needed to get those kids to school in the morning.
The next is to have a long-term vision. It's really what we found in all of the case studies that we examined is in those cities where they were looking beyond the political term or beyond someone's station in a position, those were the ones that were having the longest impact. It's important for us to be thinking not just in terms of 4 years from now, but what is the work that we're doing now what is the impact of that going to be 10, 15 years down the road? In the first book, we talked a lot about planting seeds now that we won't get to enjoy, that'll be enjoyed by next generations, and that's what that long-term vision is understanding that what we're all doing right now, some of us are a bit younger, some of us are a bit older, we might not get to reap the rewards of that, but the important thing is that vision carries on. And in Tirana, one of those examples, in addition to the investment in a child-first approach, has also been to transform their main square. This was a former massive roundabout in the heart of the city.
20,000 cars a day.
20,000 cars a day, thank you. But adjacent to it is a historic mosque. It's where their opera house is. It's where their national museum is. And so what they've done is transform this into a wonderful place where this wonderful child was banging the drum the whole time as we were there. This is on, I think, a Thursday evening. This was in April, so not super warm at the time, but everyone's just out enjoying the space, and it becomes this wonderful place for life and for staying. And that long-term vision of understanding we're going to have some pain taking away this road space, but what will happen as a result of it is what's more important, and moving towards that.
So the next thing that we identified was the importance of care work in society. The fact is that we're still making a lot of our decisions around urban planning, around transportation, through the lens of the economically productive breadwinner of the house, the single-purpose journey from the house to the office, when we completely ignore the care work that's being done. This is the lattice work that underlies our economy. It's unpaid work, getting the kids to school, getting the grocery store, food prepared, taking care of elderly parents. A lot of this is still falls on the shoulders of the female of the household disproportionately. And the more we can do to create public spaces, to create mobility networks that support that work and design for it, the more we can do to hopefully lighten that burden. So do you want to talk a little bit about
so
this?
I had the opportunity to travel to Bogota in 2023, and I got to see the major centers and where all that cycling infrastructure was being rolled out. But this one in particular was quite special to me because this is part of one of the informal communities in Bogota. There's a lot of low income here, a lot of informal employment, and what was important here is that the cycling infrastructure still existed. You saw kids cycling, you saw parents like you see here cycling with children, you saw shopkeepers in a place where maybe this seems out of the ordinary, but for them it was just part of the daily life. And as somebody coming from the Netherlands at that time where someone cycling like this is completely normal, I was like, oh my God, it can happen elsewhere. Enough with it only happens in Amsterdam, it's happening in Bogota. So. And it's all about understanding the role of care and the role of needing to access these spaces in terms of city building. And all of this comes together in a lot of ways from building alliances. We've talked a lot about partnerships already today, and that has been integral in a lot of the success of the projects that we were able to showcase, is working across boundaries, across political ideas, across beliefs, and understanding we're all working towards the same goal of better cities for the most of us. And it creates that, as was said this morning, these partnerships create stronger results. I don't know if you want to talk about Montreal a bit more.
Montreal, I mean, yeah, what can we say about the Pedestrian Streets program? It's just a remarkable success story, and it's incredible that it's even happening on the North American continent. Every summer now, from May to September, they close 11 shopping arterial roads, 9 kilometers of streets, or should I say they open them to people on foot, people on bike, people dining, people gathering. It's 2,100 local businesses that I've worked with. The business community has actually led this process, and it's really remarkable to be there, to see this, to experience it in a North American city, all through the leadership of Valerie Plant. I don't think she deserves, she deserves all kinds of, doesn't get enough plaudits in terms of what she has succeeded in that city. The hope is now, of course, as Ian indicated, that this goes from a temporary plan to something a bit more permanent, so that it doesn't feel like it's just a nice summer thing to have. That this actually becomes a permanent fixture on the Montreal streetscape. And then lastly,
the most important is that we need to prioritize impact over power. Too often, we find ourselves in these spaces where we have these leaders that get into a position of power and then stay there, because we all work really hard to get into a position of power. It's not to minimize that, but sometimes we outlive our shelf life. And in the case of Mayor Anne Hidalgo, in the case of Valerie Plant, Claudia Lopez in Bogota didn't have a choice. You can only serve for one term. But even in the case of those that were still around, or are still around today, like Elke van den Brandt in Brussels, it's understanding I was elected to do a job, or I was selected to do this job for a reason. I'm here to do it in the time that I have, and it's my job to get it done. And if the next election cycle I don't make it, okay, but I did the job I was brought here to do. And that has been the most powerful thing that we've heard from every single one of the women that we interviewed, is that impact, that job, that role that we are here for, to do it in the time that we have and not take that for granted.
So you can see here, this is actually the intersection of Rue de Sébastopol and Rue de Rivoli in the center of Paris, a street where you may have seen a handful of cyclists a few years ago. It now sees over 30,000 cyclists a day. Paris has created a cycling city out of virtually nothing in a very short period of time, and it's really remarkable to see and experience it. Of course, it's far from perfect, and it's still very much a work in progress. But what we've seen during the COVID-19 pandemic in terms of the removal of cars from the city, the prioritization of safe routes to school with the school streets, the regreening and reforesting of the city, the removal of 70,000 car parking spaces. This was all, Mayor Hidalgo was told at the very beginning that this was political suicide, and here she is 8 years later, more popular than ever, stepping down on her own terms. So with that, we will thank you very much for your attention. I think, again, it's just worth emphasizing that this is not about men versus women. This is about good leadership traits and getting the leaders that we deserve to implement the change that we know needs to happen. Our cities are so full of potential, but they're really being held back by, I think, a lot of short-term thinking and a lot of, perhaps people in power that are clinging to power. If you want to read the book, it's available everywhere, including outside in the lobby during the break. Melissa and I have 10 copies that we're happy to sell and sign. Otherwise, please do connect with us through our website, through our LinkedIn profiles, through our other social media aspects. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you for your attention, and we'll see you out in the lobby during the break. Thank you.